Hey everybody, thanks for joining us for another deep dive on the unseen wisdom. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe before we get started.
All right, let's do it.
Today we're going to be tackling something pretty controversial. It's immigration.
Very interesting topic. A lot to unpack there.
Yeah, especially in South Africa.
Oh, right. Yeah.
We got some really interesting source material
Oh, yeah.
from a speech by Gayton McKenzie.
Okay.
He's a South African politician. And I think what's really fascinating about this is how he kind of brings in the idea of reciprocity.
Yeah, that's interesting, especially when we're talking about relations between different nations.
Right.
You know, are countries obligated to treat each other's citizens in a way that reflects how their own citizens are treated abroad?
Exactly.
That's a big question right there.
It is, and I think Mackenzie's personal story really brings this idea home.
Yeah, personal anecdotes can be really powerful in these sorts of situations,
Absolutely.
They make those abstract concepts more relatable, especially when you're talking about something like reciprocity.
Right.
There are real emotional stakes involved there.
Yeah, absolutely. So Mackenzie, he talks about a trip that he took to Ethiopia with his family.
Oh.
They were just planning a short layover,
Uh-huh.
just 5 hours, and they had all their paperwork in order.
Oh, wow.
Visas, return tickets, everything.
They did everything by the book.
Exactly. They followed all the rules.
Okay.
But even though they had all the right documentation and they were upfront about, their intentions, Ethiopian border officials would not let them into the country.
Oh, wow. That's pretty frustrating.
I can imagine, especially with kids.
Yeah, traveling with kids is already stressful enough.
Yeah, you got it. And this really highlights
Yeah.
the whole idea of national sovereignty.
Right.
Every country has the right to decide who can and cannot come in.
Absolutely. And under what conditions?
Right.
Yeah.
And Mackenzie talks about how eye-opening this experience was for his children. They suddenly realized that the freedoms they're used to in South Africa aren't universal.
Right. Like those freedoms aren't a given everywhere you go.
Yeah.
It really makes you think about how differently countries treat each other's citizens.
Yeah, it really throws a wrench in the whole system
For sure.
of global relations when you think about it that way.
Absolutely.
And this whole thing in Ethiopia, it leads Mackenzie to draw a parallel to how foreigners are treated in South Africa.
Okay, interesting.
And he argues that there's a double standard.
Ah, I see where this is going.
He points to this really tragic incident in South Africa where children died after eating contaminated food from unregistered spaza shops.
Oh gosh, I hadn't heard about that.
Yeah, it's really sad.
What are spaza shops exactly?
They're like small convenience stores, and a lot of them are run by immigrants.
Okay, so this tragedy brings up a lot of different issues.
It does.
Public safety, the rule of law, and even the struggles that immigrant entrepreneurs face.
Absolutely, it's complicated.
Yeah.
And Mackenzie, he's furious that these shops were allowed to operate illegally in the first place.
Oh, yeah. I can see why he'd be upset about that.
And even more so that the government just offered them a 21-day grace period to register instead of shutting them down right away.
That does seem a bit lenient considering the circumstances.
Right, and he sees this as a lack of reciprocity.
Yeah, it sounds like he's comparing it to his own experience in Ethiopia.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like he followed the rules, but then when foreigners come to South Africa, they don't necessarily have to.
Yeah, I get it. He's seeing a disconnect there.
Yeah. And to make matters worse, Mackenzie also criticizes the media for giving these spaza shop owners a platform to complain about the registration deadline.
Oh, wow. So he's taking issue with how the media is portraying this whole thing.
He is. He thinks they're focusing on the wrong things.
That's interesting because it makes you think about how the media influences public opinion on complex issues like immigration.
Right. Whose voices get amplified and whose concerns are prioritized.
Exactly.
Really shapes the narrative.
Excellent.
Mackenzie's argument is that when South Africans try to talk about illegal immigration and the problems that come with it, they get called xenophobic.
Yeah, that's a pretty loaded term.
It is.
It's important to remember that there's a difference between, being genuinely concerned about things like security and the rule of law
Right.
and just discriminating against someone because of where they're from.
Exactly.
You can be critical of immigration policies without being xenophobic.
Right. And Mackenzie, he actually turns the whole thing around.
How so?
He asks, can South Africans just go to other countries and open businesses without the proper paperwork?
Oh, that's a good question.
It is, isn't it?
It makes you think about whether the rules around immigration are actually fair and consistent across different countries.
Yeah. Are we holding everyone to the same standard?
That's the question, isn't it?
And to really drive this point home, Mackenzie brings up some pretty controversial stuff.
Like what?
He talks about things like brothels and drug trafficking
Mm-hmm.
in South Africa, And he suggests that some of these operations are run by foreigners.
Oh, wow. So he's implying that illegal immigration could be linked to criminal activity.
Exactly. And he's asking, would other countries tolerate this kind of thing?
That's a really sensitive issue, but it's a valid question to ask.
It is. You know, when we're talking about national security and the well-being of citizens.
Absolutely. You have to consider all the potential consequences.
Right. And on top of all this, McKenzie says that South Africans are being silenced when they try to speak out about these issues.
Oh, wow. So he feels like there's no room for open and honest discussion.
Yeah, he thinks people are afraid to talk about it because they don't want to be labeled as xenophobic.
That's a problem, because if you can't even talk about something, then how can you address it?
Exactly. And he's particularly critical of political parties like the EFF.
What's the EFF?
They're a political party in South Africa that supports open borders.
Okay.
And they encourage foreigners to find creative ways to enter the country.
So they're not exactly sticking to the traditional immigration process.
Not really. But McKenzie says that when those same people commit crimes, the EFF goes silent.
So he's questioning their accountability.
Yeah, he's saying if you're going to push for open borders, then you need to take responsibility for what happens as a result.
That's a fair point. It's easy to advocate for something in theory, but the real test is what happens when things go wrong.
Exactly. You got to own the consequences.
Right.
And what makes this whole speech even more interesting is that McKenzie gave it right after he was appointed as Minister of Sports, Arts, and Culture in South Africa.
Oh, wow. So he's in a pretty prominent position.
He is.
And this is a guy who was very outspoken about illegal immigration before taking on this role.
Yeah, he didn't hold back.
I wonder if being in government has changed his perspective at all.
That's a good question. You know, sometimes when you're in the position of power, you have to be more careful about what you say.
For sure, you have to consider all the different stakeholders and the potential repercussions of your words.
Right. And some people think, including McKenzie himself, that this new role has made it harder for him to address the immigration issue directly.
Oh, that's interesting. So he feels like he's been somewhat muzzled.
In a way, yeah.
It makes you think about the compromises people make when they enter politics.
Yeah. Do you stick to your principles even if it means being less effective? Or do you play the game to get things done?
That's the eternal dilemma, isn't it?
It is.
And in McKenzie's case, some people believe his appointment to the specific ministry was a strategic move to quiet him down.
Yeah, like a way to redirect his energy away from something more controversial.
It's hard to say for sure what the motivations were, but it definitely raises some eyebrows.
It does. It makes you wonder if he can still be an effective voice on this issue.
Yeah. Can he advocate for what he believes in from within the system, or will he have to choose between his principles and his position?
It's a tough spot to be in, for sure. So where does this all leave us? We've heard McKenzie's experience with immigration.
Yeah, and we talked about the spaza shop issue.
Yeah. And even touched on how McKenzie's new government position might be affecting his ability to speak out.
Right. It's a lot to take in.
It is. But I think what McKenzie really wants us to think about is this idea of reciprocity.
Yeah, he keeps coming back to that.
He does.
Like, how would we want to be treated if we were the ones trying to immigrate to another country?
Right. It's a powerful question.
It is. It really puts things in perspective.
It makes you think about immigration from a more human angle.
Absolutely. It's not just about laws and economics.
Right. It's about treating people with fairness and respect.
Exactly. And if we expect other countries to treat our citizens well,
right,
then we should extend the same courtesy to those who come to our country.
Yeah, it's got to be a two-way street.
And reciprocity doesn't mean just opening the borders to everyone.
No.
It's about finding a balance
right
between being welcoming and also protecting our own interests.
Exactly. And I think that's where the real challenge lies.
Yeah. How do we create immigration policies that are both fair and effective?
It's a tough question with no easy answers.
It is, but I think it all starts with having an open and honest conversation.
Right. Being able to discuss these issues without fear of being labeled or shut down.
Exactly. We need to hear from all sides.
Yeah, from those who support open borders and those who want stricter controls.
Right, and from immigrants themselves.
Absolutely. They need to have a voice in this too.
Yeah, their perspectives are crucial.
They are. So I think that's a good place to leave it for today.
Yeah, food for thought.
It is. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Gayton McKenzie's perspective on immigration.
Always a pleasure.
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.